What's going on, everybody? Cleepus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the TCL 30XL and the BLU Bold N2. Now before we go any further, as always, I do want to remind you to hit that subscribe button, and if you want to learn more about either of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing and availability. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the TCL 30XL, we're getting a 6.82-inch LCD display with a 720p resolution, a PPI of 270, an aspect ratio of 20.5:9, and a 90% screen to body ratio. With the BLU Bold N2, we're getting a 6.6-inch AMOLED display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 390, an aspect ratio of 19.5:9, and a 90.9% screen to body ratio. So both phones do have pretty good displays, but each phone has a couple advantages. On one hand, with the TCL 30XL, as you can see, this phone is significantly larger, and this tends to be a good thing when you're doing something like reading, for example, where you just need things to be a little bit easier to see. And in addition to this, with a 20.5:9 aspect ratio versus 19.5:9, the TCL 30XL has a significantly taller and more narrow form factor. So if you're doing something like watching a video in landscape mode, for example, you're going to get a more immersive experience. And if you're doing something like reading, with this phone, you're going to be able to fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. On the other hand though, the BLU Bold N2 definitely has a much higher quality image. First of all, as you can see here, despite both phones being at 100% brightness, the BLU Bold N2 is definitely a lot brighter. And with the AMOLED display, the colors are also a little bit more vibrant, and the viewing angles are a lot better as well. So if you're outside in the sun, for example, the BLU Bold N2 is going to be a lot easier to see. In addition to this, with a 1080p resolution, the image is going to be a lot sharper and more crisp. So if you're doing something like watching a video, playing games, or looking at photos, things are going to look a lot better with the BLU Bold N2. So in general, I would say for stuff like reading, or maybe just basic web browsing, where you just want things to be a little bit larger and easier to see, the TCL 30XL will have a bit of an advantage. But if you're doing any other kind of content consumption, where the quality of the image really matters, the BLU Bold N2 will definitely be a better choice. Now for storage, the TCL 30XL is getting 64GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and the BLU Bold N2 is getting 256GB with no microSD card expansion. So on one hand, having microSD card expansion is a nice thing, but in this case, the difference in storage is really just so much, with the BLU Bold N2 having quadruple the storage of the TCL 30XL, that I feel like not even microSD card expansion is really going to help a whole lot, because if you have a lot of apps and stuff like that, having more space on the phone itself is just better. But that being said, with 64GB, it is at least acceptable if you're not doing a whole lot with your phone. But if you're more of a power user and you have a lot of apps, and honestly, in really just any situation where you really care about storage, the BLU Bold N2 is definitely going to have a huge advantage here. Now for security features, both phones do have face unlock, and they also have fingerprint scanners. With the TCL 30XL, it's right here on the back, and with the BLU Bold N2, it's right here in the display. But starting with the TCL 30XL, let's give these fingerprint scanners a try and see how well they work. There we go, one more time. And there we go. Moving on to the BLU Bold N2. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see there, both fingerprint scanners were real fast and responsive. And again, remember, both phones also have face unlock as well, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setups here, with the TCL 30XL, we got a water drop notch for the front facing camera. This camera is 13 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. With the BLU Bold N2, we got whatever this is for the front-facing camera. This camera is 16 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 64 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra-wide camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. For video, the TCL 30XL has a max recording quality of 1080p in both the rear and front cameras, and the BLU Bold N2 has a max recording quality of 2K in the rear camera and 1080p in the front. So as far as features go, they're pretty much the same, with the exception of the BLU Bold N2 being able to record in 2K, but honestly, that's really not that much of an advantage. If you want to record in a better quality than 1080p, I feel like you might as well just go to 4K instead. But if you do like to record videos in 2K, then definitely keep in mind the BLU Bold N2 does have this ability. But other than that, the features are pretty much the same. For the camera stuff, they have pretty much everything, including an ultra-wide camera and a macro camera. So if you're taking a lot of pictures and you want a wider variety of features, then either phone will be a great choice. And as far as the actual quality goes, both phones do take good photos for what they are, but I would say that overall, the BLU Bold N2 is a little bit better. So in general, if the camera is one of your top priorities, I would say the BLU Bold N2 will be a slightly better choice. But that being said, if you do like to take a lot of photos and you want good quality too, while the BLU Bold N2 is a little better, the TCL 30XL still will get the job done. Now as far as RAM and processor go, with the the TCL 30XL, we're getting 6GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio A25 processor. With the BLU Bold N2, we're getting 8GB of RAM with the MediaTek Dimensity 810. Now, one thing I do want to point out here is that the BLU Bold N2 is actually a 5G phone and the TCL 30XL is not, so definitely keep that in mind if you want 5G connectivity. That being said, I did run Geekbench 5 benchmark tests on both of these phones, and with the TCL 30XL, we're getting a single core score of 156 and a multi-core score of 885, and with the BLU Bold N2, we're getting a single core score of 586 and a multi-core score of 1685. So as you can see here between the two, the BLU Bold N2 is not only a 5G phone, but it's also significantly more powerful than the TCL 30XL. So if you're doing higher end activities like mobile gaming, for example, or you're just going to be on your phone a lot, between the two, you will get a better experience with the BLU Bold N2. But that being said, with the TCL 30XL, while it's not nearly as fast as the BLU Bold N2, if you're just doing basic activities like web browsing, social media, sending text messages, making calls, and stuff like that, and you're really just not going to be on your phone a whole lot, you're still at least going to get a decent experience here. Now for the battery, with the TCL 30XL, we're getting a 5000 mAh battery that supports 18 watt fast charging, and with the BLU Bold N2, this phone has a 4200 mAh battery that supports 30 watt fast charging. So between the two, the TCL 30XL clearly has a much larger battery, so if battery life and longevity is really one of your top priorities, then the TCL 30XL of course will have an advantage. But that being said, despite having a smaller battery, the BLU Bold N2 with again a 4200 mAh battery still really isn't bad, and the 30 watt fast charging definitely helps out a lot too. So in general, if you just want a decent battery that's going to last throughout the day, you're really not going to go wrong with either phone. But if the battery is more of a priority for you, the TCL 30XL still will have an advantage. Another thing to keep in mind here is that neither phone has NFC, so if you do like to make contactless mobile payments using tap and pay, unfortunately, you're not going to be able to do that with either of them. And yeah, another thing I do want to point out is that with the TCL 30XL, like pretty much any phone in this price range, we do get a 3.5mm headphone jack, whereas for whatever reason with the BLU Bold N2, this phone does not have a headphone jack. So if that is a feature that's important to you, definitely keep this in mind. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? In general, in almost every way, I would say the BLU Bold N2 is a better device, which is not really that surprising considering this phone is a bit higher end than the TCL 30XL. But that being said, despite this, the TCL 30XL does have 1.5 advantages here. First of all, the display is much larger, and with a 20.5:9 aspect ratio versus 19.5:9. Again, we are getting a taller and more narrow form factor here, and I know some people really do like that. So if you want a larger display with better dimensions, the TCL 30XL will be better in that regard, but I still don't really think this means the display is better overall, because when it comes to quality, the BLU Bold N2 is just so much better. The other advantage the TCL 30XL has is the battery. Again, while the BLU Bold N2 doesn't really have bad battery life, in fact in my experience it has been pretty good. With a 5000 mAh battery, the TCL 30XL is going to get much better battery life and longevity. So if you have maybe more of a mobile lifestyle, for example, and you're not always around a charger, then this is definitely going to make a difference. And then finally, the one last little advantage the TCL 30XL has is that it does have a headphone jack, whereas again, the BLU Bold N2 doesn't. But honestly, this isn't really that much of a difference, because the BLU Bold N2 not only comes with a pair of USB-C headphones, but also a USB-C adapter. So if you do have a pair of 3.5mm headphones you want to use, you can technically still use them, you just won't be able to charge the phone at the same time. So honestly, considering what actually comes in the box when you get the BLU Bold N2, not having a headphone jack, while kind of annoying and not really making a whole lot of sense, still really isn't that much of a problem considering you do get an adapter. So other than those differences, I do think the BLU Bold N2, with a much faster processor, 5G connectivity, a significantly higher quality display, quadruple the storage, and slightly better camera quality, is going to be a much better choice for most people. But again, if you're just using your phone for basic activities, the TCL 30XL is not going to be a bad option either. But this concludes my comparison between the TCL 30XL and the BLU Bold N2. Again, if you want to learn more about either of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing and availability, because this is always changing. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow BLU Bold Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.